We buy a primary residence, when we buy a home, not an investment property, but when we buy a house, what do we look for? Location. So we look at the proximity to our work, we look at how close it is to family and friends, we look at how close it is to the freeways and the shopping, we look at the safety, school districts. If we have children, we'll want to look at the school. That's going to be a big one, right? Where are the schools that we want to enroll our children in? So we'll look at the school districts, we'll look at the safety, we'll look at the location and in terms of our job and our family and whatnot. Then we'll look at neighborhoods and we'll evaluate different neighborhoods, and maybe some of us will want walkways and access to shopping, and we'll want to look at a neighborhood and say, okay, this is a neighborhood we feel comfortable living in ourselves. And then we'll look at individual houses. And then we'll look at those properties and we'll look inside of them and we'll look at, well, I want a big closet space. Some of us want big closets, or we'll look at a backyard if we have pets or we have children. We'll look at if we want to entertain guests, maybe we want a big kitchen. So we will not be able to agree on the houses we live in because we all live in different locations and we have different preferences. When it comes to investing in real estate, all that gets removed. All of our own personal bias and all of our own personal opinions and preferences get thrown right out, and you look at it based on statistics and data and research. So the very first thing we're going to look at is the job market. The job market is going to have the biggest impact on the real estate values and also the rental market. The job market will tell us how the values will fare over time. It will tell us how the rental market will fare over time. It'll tell us how large the pool of renters will be, and potentially how is the demographic of renter that we might be able to attract. All of that really is a big part of the job market. So what we're looking for are places that have lower than national average unemployment, that have strong job growth, that have major employers that are moving there or that have locations there. But we're not going to look at just the job growth or the unemployment rate because we want economic diversity. That means many different industries: government, healthcare, trade, agriculture, technology, education. We want to buy in markets that have strong diversity, a lot of different industries. Economic diversity will hold the value of real estate over time. So what happens if you buy property at a place, and this is, the reason I'm telling you this is because this is a mistake that a lot of people make. They look at Orange County, or let's say we live in San Francisco, or San Jose, or Orange County, LA, San Diego. Now typically, without this information, the typical newbie investor said, well, I don't want to buy a place for $700,000 or $800,000 or $900,000 because it's not going to make sense. So I'm going to look at where I live is Riverside, or San Bernardino, or Hemet, or Murrieta, or Temecula. So I'm going to go way out, like 2 hours away from the job market, because instead of $700,000, I could buy a place for $350,000. So they look out 2 or 3 hours east, and they're basing their decision off the price. They're like, well, the price is less, so it's got to be a better investment. Meanwhile, they're missing out on all the criteria that's going to help them have a successful property. So up here, we might be looking out, way out east, and that's what most of us do because we don't have the information to be able to do the due diligence, and people don't know what to look for. So we have to look at a place that's within a major metropolitan market, within a downtown. So if we're talking about outside of California, I'm talking about Phoenix, Arizona. I'm talking about Tampa, Florida, Dallas, Texas, Indianapolis, Indiana, major metropolitan markets that have millions of people living there and many different industries, not small podunk towns out in the middle of nowhere. So we're buying an investment property. So we want affordability. We want to get the most bang for our buck. We want to look at a place where we can buy 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 properties with the same out-of-pocket cost that it might take to buy one property here. We want to look at getting the most income for the least amount of capital. So we're going to look at affordability. Then we're going to look at, is the state in which we're buying property landlord-friendly or tenant-friendly? We'll look at the education, the universities and colleges, because that's going to fuel the future economy. If we have universities and colleges there, they're eventually going to join the workforce. So for a good example is like Austin, Texas has UT, and there's over 50,000 students. It's a massive, huge college. So we want to know what the colleges and universities are there and what what they specialize in maybe, if we really want to get that refined. And then we want reliable property management. This is basically the checklist for where it makes sense to invest. Now, can we all agree that it doesn't make sense to buy investment property in every city in the country, right? Some places have incredibly high property taxes. Some places have just incredibly high insurance. Some places, it's just, there's no job market, right? So we all know that, not every city makes sense to invest in. Well, then how do you know what does and doesn't? And so there you go. So now we know what does make sense. Yes.
Do you recommend Detroit, Michigan?
What? Detroit?
Yeah.
I don't see why. I don't see why it would make sense, because there's so many other places that have stronger job markets, higher demand, and better future outlook. So I'm not big on Detroit.
Nobody.
You mentioned
It's always picked on, right?
you mentioned it. You think it's better to invest somewhere you can buy 4, 5, 6 properties instead of 1 or 2. What about the time it takes to, say, manage a property, or even just having to pay for property management in a number of little properties? It's just more stuff to manage.
Depends on how much capital you have. It depends on what your goals are. So some people are going to want to diversify, and they may want to buy, let's say, 6 properties in 2 cities, 3 here and 3 here. So I'm very big on diversifying. I'm also very big on not spreading yourself too thin. So there's definitely a balance there, right? Now, if you have, $4 million sitting in the bank, it doesn't make sense to buy 30 or 40 or 50 rental properties. I would say start with a good A or luxury class property here locally in the Bay Area, and then start buying apartment buildings. Now, if we have $200,000, $250,000, $300,000, then we have to look at what options we have available. And I would say maybe pick 2 cities, maybe 3 cities. I wouldn't spread myself too thin though. And then with the property management, it's all an opportunity cost. So when we go through, the numbers, I'm going to share with you what the costs are. And then we're going to look at it and we're going to evaluate, well, does it make more sense for us to do it ourselves and take away from our job and our family and everything, and we're not the professionals? Or does it make more sense to hire a team? So now you think you get where I'm saying. So if you're looking at buying 10 properties, don't spread that across 10 cities. So Austin, Texas is like the poster child for a strong job market, right? And we all know about Austin because we're mainly engineers here, and we know that Austin is the second largest technology hub in the country. Apple and Dell and Google and Facebook, and so it's called Silicon Hills. They have their own cute name for it. But what's interesting about Austin is that it's the state capital, and there's over 1 million people that live in the city and 2 million that live in the metro, and their unemployment rate is half of the national average. So this isn't a tiny little town out in North Dakota where 10 or 20,000 people live. This is a state capital with millions of people. So very, very, very strong job market. And although the property class will tell you more about the vacancy rate, the unemployment rate and the job market will tell you how much demand that you're going to have for your property. So what this means is that a lot of companies that we already know are setting up locations in Dallas and in Austin, bringing more jobs. All of those people are going to need to rent, and some of them are going to buy. So the people that are buying, well, that's increasing, the real estate market. The ones that are renting, putting more demand in the rental market. So actually, go ahead and in your folder on the left-hand side, in the very back, there's a flyer that says research websites. Somewhere towards the back. We're gonna go through some of these in a second, but you have a list of about 25 websites on here. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is the API and the data that Google gets, they get it from the government website that tracks unemployment. So if you wanted to actually look at a market and figure out the percentage of jobs in each category, in each industry, you can go on that website and it'll look something like this. So this is Atlanta. They give you an employment mix. This is from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so this is what I mean by economic diversity, right? So you have government, hospitality, trade, financial services, manufacturing. So that's very important, because if we're gonna buy a property 2 hours away or 3 hours away from the downtown, whether that's up here or where I live in Orange County, then we know that probably about 50 or 60 or 70% might be in one industry if it's a smaller town, farther away from the job market. Good example is North Dakota. So you guys are familiar with fracking, that sideways oil drilling that was really big, about 5 years ago. Well, what it did was it brought just an incredible surge of jobs up to North Dakota, where they have the oil shale in what's called the Bakken. So from 2010 until about 2014, the town of Williston, North Dakota saw just this explosion of jobs and people there. And in November 2013, I flew up there, and remember, I'm from California. I've lived here my whole life. So I go to Williston, North Dakota in November, and it's below 0 at night. And I had to actually buy snow jackets, and I had to get thermals and all, gloves and all these things that I didn't even have. So I go there with my partner Ross, and Ross is the other co-owner of Marshall Reddick Real Estate. So Ross and I go there, and we explore Williston, North Dakota. It's just fields and fields and fields of the flames, from the oil drilling. And we talk to different people there on the airplane and in restaurants, and we find that everybody's from somewhere else. They're from Ohio or Illinois or Michigan or Montana, and they're, these guys are making $100,000 a year. They've never been to college. Some of them aren't even high school graduates. But that was the demand at the time. And what Williston, North Dakota is the opposite of this. So it had one industry there. It had one industry, and it was oil. At one time, in about 2010 to like 2013 or 14, if you bought a 3-bedroom townhome, and you guys, has anybody ever seen the movie Fargo, North Dakota? The Fargo? So there you go.
Yes.
Okay. So at one time, if you bought this 3-bedroom townhome, it would rent out for $3,000 a month. That's like where I live in like Irvine prices. So now, because oil's dropped, those same properties, those same 3-bedroom townhomes are renting for $1,500. So everybody who bought property, their rent just got cut in half. And could you imagine owning a rental property, thinking it's going to rent for this, and 2 or 3 years later, the rent drops in half? So, and the only reason that happened is because of this. It didn't have any economic diversity. So, let me come back. Forbes and CNN Money are great sources to get information from. So we're constantly looking at data from Forbes and CNN Money because they pull information from NAR, from Home Builders Union, and all these different sources, and they compile it for us. This one's a little old. This is from November of 2014, but the data still stands, and in fact, it's actually been like further exacerbated since then. But it talks about Toyota leaving Torrance in LA and going to Plano. It talks about Schwab moving a lot of jobs out of San Francisco to Austin and El Paso. And then they talk about Apple's expansion in Austin. But even in just the last year, in Dallas alone, so Toyota left Torrance to Plano. FedEx is opening a location in Dallas. That's 1,500 jobs. And then Liberty Mutual is moving their headquarters to Dallas, creating 5,000 jobs. So in the last year, 3 major companies just added 10,000 jobs. It's the political climate there. It's because of the low regulation, low cost of doing business, low taxes. So I'm not trying to scare everybody and say, hey, let's all move to Texas. I like living in California. I love it here. It's where my family is, where I'm from. I'm just saying that when I'm buying investment property, something like this is the best news that I could see when I own a property. And it's not a coincidence. This is a trend. A lot of companies are finding it very difficult to do business here. And are expanding in places like Texas, where the cost of business and the workforce is ideal. So I show Zillow, the point that I want to make is that Zillow is a good starting point, but it's not a good ending point. And the reason is a lot of the data on Zillow isn't always accurate. A lot of homes for sale are not always going to appear on Zillow. And I still think it's a good tool. It's a good starting point, though. You want to have a local realtor who can verify the information, who can walk through the property, right? Because we won't know the condition.